Some receivers are red hot, others are testing your patience, and a few more are one dud week away from your bench. And week 8 has a few sneaky good matchups and a few traps. So let's run through the wide receiver rankings and figure out who you can trust to light it up this week. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King, and before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings between Jake and Kyle. And for more detailed analysis, make sure to check out the start-sit videos from Kyle already posted on the channel this week. If you want even more breakdowns each week, join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting that join button below. That's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and a spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we dive into week 8, let's look at a couple of our hits and misses from week number 7. Our first hit is Davante Adams, and listen, we had comments last week saying that Adams in tier 1 was dumb. Well, he finished wide receiver 5, so I guess it wasn't that dumb. Our next hit was Wan'Dale Robinson, and we didn't overthink the matchup against Denver too much, and we put him at wide receiver 26, and he finished at wide receiver 20 on the week. Our next hit was Tez Johnson, and there was a ton of unknown during the rankings last week surrounding the availability of Evans and Ibuka, and we labeled Tez as the top pickup in Tampa Bay. And once Evans went down again, Tez was the next man up in the offense. Okay, so there's our hits, but what about our misses? And we start with DK Metcalf, a matchup against Cincy where Flacco is putting up points and he gets 5 targets, out-targeted by Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And then next up, what about Devontae Smith? And hey, what do you know? It's still impossible to know when a Philly receiver is going to pop off, and I'm sure that this is just sucking us in for future disappointment. And then our next miss is Rome Odunze, and back-to-back bad games, but so many points are being left on the field due to a few bad throws and some stupid flags. And of course, weather wasn't also great in week 7 for him. Okay, there's our hits and misses. Let's turn the page to week 8. And in tier 1, we've got Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Emeka Ibuka, Rashee Rice, Cortland Sutton, Rome Odunze, and Drake London. Topping the list, we've got Jamar Chase, and it's crazy. 2 weeks ago, he was in tier 3, and now 35 targets, 26 receptions, 255 yards, and 2 touchdowns in 2 games with Joe Flacco. The new Joe in Cincy has made Chase a stud once again, and Sauce Gardner is in concussion protocol, which can only help. At number 2, we've got Justin Jefferson, and he couldn't get much going against Philly, but he does have 10-plus targets in 3 straight games. The Chargers won't be the easiest matchup, and of course, Thursday night games tend to suck more times than not. At number 3, we've got CeeDee Lamb, and Surtain typically shadows the opponent's best wide receiver. However, he's gone to the slot only 10% of the time this season, and with CeeDee Lamb living in the slot right now, you have to think that Pickens draws the coverage from Surtain, and CeeDee Lamb feasts in week 8. At number 4, we've got Emeka Ibuka, and everyone was shocked that Ibuka played in week 7. And now we know that Mike Evans is done for the year, and Ibuka's volume is going to remain high. The Saints defense is pretty average against the pass, so there's no reason that he can't excel in week 8. At number 5, we've got Rashee Rice, and 10 targets in his first game back, and it's like he never left. The yardage wasn't huge, but the red zone targets will be there weekly, and now he gets a matchup against Washington, who allows the 10th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. At number 6, we've got Cortland Sutton, and you already know this, but no team in the NFL allows more fantasy points per game to wide receivers than the Dallas Cowboys. But we're starting to see Bo Nix spread the ball around a bit more, and that's lowering the touchdown upside of Sutton, so we're hoping for those 10-plus targets this week. At number 7, we've got Rome Odunze, and yes, back-to-back bad games, and it has people panicking a little bit, but there's been a ton of yards and touchdowns that have been barely missed and called back by penalties. And now he gets Baltimore, who allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, so we're hoping for a bounce back week. At number 8, we've got Drake London, and a matchup against Miami is great. However, not knowing if Penix is going to play or not play, That's not great. His foot injury, if it's limiting him at all, that could affect the quality of targets that are going to be going the way of Drake London. All right, so that's it for tier 1. And before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all hooked up on Underdog. You already know that we're crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year, so what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app. Create a new account using the referral code HEADLINERS when you do so, and then just make your initial deposit and come join a contest. And if you sign up with that promo code, again, it's HEADLINERS, you'll get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. And check this out. Once you play your first $5, they're going to give you $100 in bonus funds. So you play 5, you get 100. It's that easy. And don't forget, Jake is also going to be breaking down the best picks weekly in a show on Fridays. And the links to join are in the description. And we look forward to playing with you on Underdog Fantasy this week. All right, baby, let's look at tier 2. We got A.J. Brown, Chris Olave, T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman Jr., Jordan Addison, Keenan Allen, and Devontae Smith. At number 9, we've got A.J. Brown, and when Hurts makes it a priority to force the ball down the field to A.J. Brown, good things happen. Unfortunately, doesn't happen every week, and now he gets a rematch against the Giants, who held him to just 80 scoreless yards 2 weeks ago. At number 10, we've got Chris Olave, and finding the end zone twice in week 7 was a huge boost to Olave. He now has 71 targets through 7 games, and he's had back-to-back games of over 90 yards receiving. And we expect Tampa to get an early lead, and the Saints to throw all 4 quarters. At number 11, we've got T. Higgins, and his volume and production may be nowhere near that of Chase, but he did just have his first game with double-digit targets in week 7. This Flacco-led offense throws the ball enough to once again make Higgins fantasy viable. At number 12, we've got DK Metcalf, and Arthur Smith continues to kill the value of DK, and in week 7, it happened again. They just don't scheme enough targets for him. And this matchup may not be great against Green Bay, but Rodgers is going to want to stick it to his former team, and he's going to need his top playmaker. At number 13, we've got Michael Pittman Jr., and Pittman benefited last week from Josh Downs being ruled out. Downs should return this week, though, and Tennessee is way easier to run on than throw on. So if the Colts get an early lead, we'll see more JT than Pittman late in the game. At number 14, we've got Jordan Addison going to LA, and he's only played 3 games this year, but he's scored at least 10 fantasy points in all 3 of them. He's had over 110 yards receiving in 2 of the 3 games with Wentz at quarterback, and you have to think that his volume remains this week as well. At number 15, we've got Keenan Allen, and he's coming off the best game that he's had all year. He remains the safety blanket in this offense, and in a tough matchup on Thursday night, he may have the safest floor. And at 16, we've got Devontae Smith, and over the last 4 games, Smith has 2 games over 110 yards and 2 games under 50. He is truly a 50-50 boom or bust play, and the last time he faced New York 2 weeks ago, they held him to 49 scoreless yards. All right, that's it for tier 2. Now let's look at tier 3. We've got Ted McMillan, Zay Flowers, Stephon Diggs, Xavier Worthy, Wan'Dale Robinson, Ladd McConkey, George Pickens, Tez Johnson, Quentin Johnston, and Jalen Waddle. Let's start it out with King Ted McMillan. And can the veteran Andy Dalton have a resurgence game like we've seen from Joe Flacco as of late? Going against Buffalo, who's coming off the bye, Carolina is going to need their number 1 wide receiver in order to have a chance at winning. At number 18, we've got Zay Flowers, and Chicago allows almost 30 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. But as of right now, Lamar Jackson is still questionable to play, and it's hard to put him any higher if we're relying on Cooper Rush. At 19, we've got Stephon Diggs, and the Patriots continue to win games by utilizing different weapons each week. Diggs may be the safest floor play in the offense, and we know it's easier to throw on Cleveland than it is to run on them. So we're hoping for around 8 targets for Stephon Diggs this week. At 20, we've got Xavier Worthy, and with Rice returning, that means less volume going the way of Xavier Worthy. He'll have the occasional big play, but it's going to be sporadic. He may only find himself inside the top 24 in good matchups like this one against Washington. Washington. At number 21, we've got Wan'Dale Robinson, and Darius Slayton is questionable to play, so Robinson is going to have another opportunity for big targets in week 8. He's had 5+ receptions in 5 of 7 games this season, and 2 weeks ago against Philly, he put up 84 yards and a touchdown. At 22, we've got Ladd McConkey and Thursday Night Football against a Minnesota team that allows the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers and an offense filled with weapons. Yeah, it's a tough one, and there isn't a clear great option for LA this week, so we've got Ladd there at 22. At number 23, we've got George Pickens going to Denver, and Pickens still made some big plays even with the return of CeeDee Lamb last week, and that's great to see going forward, but in a tough matchup with Patrick Surtain shadowing him, really lowers his floor and ceiling in week 8. At number 24, we've got Tez Johnson, and with Mike Evans now done for the year and Ibuka handling the opponent's best defender, Tez will not only see more targets, but he has a great opportunity to produce the rest of the season. And we like that the Saints allow 26.5 fantasy points per game to wide receivers as well. At number 25, we've got Quentin Johnston, and getting Johnston back last week was a huge boost to the passing game of LA. But like we said with McConkey earlier, it's just hard to know which weapon will go off each week, especially in a tough matchup like this on a Thursday night. And then at number 26, we have Jalen Waddle, and a Miami offense that has looked like hot garbage as of late now gets a matchup against the Falcons, who allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. There's nothing about this matchup that is safe this week. All right, that's it for tier 3. Now let's look at tier 4. We've got Romeo Doubs, Khalil Shakir, Rashid Shaheed, Matthew Golden, DJ Moore, Kendrick Bourne, Troy Franklin, Kayshon Boutte, Jawan Jennings, and Nico Collins. At 27, we have Romeo Doubs, and 8+ targets and 5+ receptions in 3 straight. It makes him the most consistent weekly Green Bay wide receiver. Unfortunately, the touchdowns are a little bit hit or miss, but this is a great matchup going up against Pittsburgh, who allows the 6th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. At number 28, we have Khalil Shakir, and 3 out of the 6 games this season for Shakir have resulted in less than 50 yards receiving. And this Carolina pass defense, it's super strong on the outside, so we could see Shakir turn into a check down option in week 8. At number 29, we've got Rashid Shaheed, and the targets are there, but he just can't seem to reel them in or do much with them. He has 15 targets over the last 2 games, but only 8 receptions for 68 yards. If Tampa can get that early lead, though, he should be looking at 8+ targets again. At number 30, we have Matthew Golden, and the big game is coming at some point. He's really like the Xavier Worthy of the Packers offense. And if Rodgers can put up points against Green Bay, though, we could see a deep shot or 2 go the way of Golden this week. At number 31, we have DJ Moore, and it's crazy to think that DJ Moore hasn't reached 75 yards in a game since week 1. He's just been steady around that 5 to 8 fantasy points per game, but hopefully with the injuries to the Baltimore defense, his ceiling is going to be a little bit higher this week. At number 32, we have Kendrick Bourne, and we're still uncertain whether or not Ricky Pearsall returns this week, but even if he does, this isn't a great matchup for the 49ers wide receivers. Houston allows the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing wideouts. At number 33, we've got Troy Franklin, and somehow Troy Franklin just got 10 targets, but only turned it into a whopping 19 yards total in week 7. This matchup against Dallas this week, though, will be much easier and could easily turn into an offensive shootout. At number 34, we have Kayshon Boutte, and it's hard to rely on him because his target share is so low, but he's had a play of at least 15 yards in every game, though, and it only takes him a catch or 2 to have a great day. It's tough to run in Cleveland, so he could get the booty call and get involved in the vertical passing game again this week. At number 35, we have Jawan Jennings, and it's really hard to put Jennings any higher in a tough matchup like this, and considering the fact that he's playing with broken ribs, he could have to come out of the game at any point. And at number 36, we've got Nico Collins, and I'm putting him right here because I know some of you are in the comments right now going, where's Nico Collins? He's currently in concussion protocol, and it's unclear whether or not he's even going to play in week 8. But if he is able to play, he's going to slot right back into the top 12 to 15 wide receivers on the week. All right, so there's your top 36 in tiers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we've got a few guys on the outside looking in, as well as some injuries that we're monitoring. And that's Deebo Samuel Sr., Terry McLaurin, Darnell Mooney, Ricky Pearsall, Josh Downs, and Garrett Wilson. And that's your week 8 wide receiver rankings, and plenty of shakeups at the top and a few breakout names to watch. And so good luck setting those lineups, Headliner Nation. We'll see you in the next one.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels, not